So Helldivers has been out for a few months now, and if you're stuck at level 4, 5, 6, you might find yourself asking, how do I get better at Helldivers? Well, that's what we're going to go over in this video, so sit down, grab a notebook, and let's go over some tips. But first, the most important tip I can go over is I want to make it clear that getting to higher levels does not make the game more fun, and there's nothing wrong with playing the game at a lower level. If you're having fun at level 6, there's no reason to go up unless you want to go up and experience those harder difficulties. If you've said 6 is the difficulty I'm comfortable at, this is where I want to be, this is where I have the most fun, there is no reason to go into level 7, 8, 9 if you don't want to. With all of that said, it is harder to get better at Helldivers than most other games because Helldivers kind of breaks the conventions of other video games. You don't get more points, more experience, or anything out of defeating enemies, whereas most games you need to defeat enemies for better loot, for more experience, for new skills. Running away is an active and good strategy, and dying isn't necessarily a bad thing. So to get better at Helldivers, you kind of have to unlearn all the things every other video game teaches you. So let's talk about fighting and engagement first. Now, some people will tell you that fighting is pointless, because as I said, you don't get any gear for it, you don't get any loot for it, you don't get any experience for it, but there is a point to fighting. And the main point of that is that there can only be one active call-in on the map at a time. What this means is when an enemy calls in a reinforcement or they call in a bug hole, that can only happen wherever that's happening at that exact moment. This is why so many teams opt to do a 2-and-2 scenario, where you have 2 Helldivers go one way and 2 Helldivers go another way. Because when one of them triggers that call-in, now the other 2 Helldivers are free to take an objective or complete something without all those reinforcements. A good Helldiver will also use this to their advantage and know that if you deplete that call-in before you take a big objective, then chances are that call-in won't happen during the objective. For example, if you know you're a group of 4 and you know that call-in is off cooldown, so it's going to happen in the next fight, you can pick a fight with a patrol and have it happen on favorable terms. Have it happen while your stratagems are up, or where you're in an area with a lot of cover, or whatever it is you need to use to your advantage for that fight, so it's not randomly happening on the objective while you're trying to fight, but rather you chose when to engage and how to engage so that that fight is more in your favor. So hopefully you see there's a difference between just picking a fight and fighting every single thing you see, and saying, I'm going to start this fight so my allies can go and take this objective, or I'm going to start this fight here because we all have our stratagems up, rather than starting the fight while we're trying to take over an objective and becoming overwhelmed. You need to know what the strength of your kit is that you're bringing, and play to those strengths. For example, a very common kit I see someone bring is a Quasar Cannon, a backpack shield, a 500 kg, and a laser. That's a pretty heavy anti-tank build, with the laser being a complete wipe the field or take out a very heavily fortified target. That means if you're bringing this kit, you need to focus on those heavy enemies, those tank enemies. Let everyone else worry about the chaff, or the people who have the anti-chaff weapons worry about them. Because if you're the only guy who can take out the Hulks or the Chargers or the Bile Titans or whatever it may be, then that's your job and responsibility to do that while they handle everything else. And while in other videos you'll hear me talk about bringing a jack-of-all-trades build that you can take care of everything anti-chaff, anti-tank, you can do the whole objective, that's not really effective at the higher levels. If you're too preoccupied with taking everything down, there's going to be something slipping through the cracks, and your allies might not be able to take care of whatever it is that's slipping through. For example, the charger spawns are outrageous right now. There are so many chargers. And if I'm failing to take out the chargers while I have, say, the recoilless rifle, and no one else has something to deal with it, then yes, I can handle the chaff, but so can they. They don't have the ability to handle the chargers while I do. So, pick your objective, what you're trying to deal with, what your kit is supposed to handle, and do that. Do that thing very well. The last thing I want to talk about when it comes to combat is dealing with the environment. For example, the bots, if they lose their balance and fall over, they are instantly knocked out. So you should always fight them uphill or downhill, because as they're moving, they're going to lose their balance as they're hit, and that can cause an instant takeout. Having things like giant rocks between you and the enemy gives you cover to break that line of sight and to break damaging abilities like rockets or constant devastator fire. Before engaging an enemy, take a few seconds to look at where you're at. Are you out in an open field? Well, maybe don't fire. Instead, find some place where you can take cover, you can crouch and fire from and be completely covered while you're firing on the enemies. And if the terrain's not to your advantage, reposition. Go find a place where you can hide and fight from. Even if you get engaged, doesn't mean you have to stay there. You could run away, and that's a completely valid strategy. On both bugs and bots, there are certain units that move faster than others, so if you move back as a squad, the fast units will get to you first and allow you to take them out while the slower units are still coming in. This allows you a break in the action and a way to reevaluate your strategy, as well as again find that favorable terrain that you need. Alright, let's move away from combat and talk about what you as a player can do in the mission itself to really move yourself up as a better player. Knowing what to do and when to do it is the single most important thing that moves you from a player who doesn't know what they're doing to a pro who knows what they're doing. As we talked about in previous examples, if your team is drawing fire and getting the call-ins on them and you're near the objective, you now have a free objective to take because all the call-ins, reinforcements, big enemies are on the other side of the map or engaged with them. But there's other knowledge that's super important to have as well. Let's take stalkers, for example. If you have the misfortune of spawning near a stalker's lair at like the start of the mission while everyone's still gearing up, you are in the most vulnerable state in the entire game. Those stalkers will sneak in and take you out before you can get your weapons to deal with them. And oftentimes people will try and run away or they'll try and call in their gear, and it causes this huge panic where no one's cooperating and no one's doing anything. When a stalker lair is up and near, your number one priority is to get rid of the stalker's nest. And being able to prioritize those things is one of the most important skills you'll ever have. If you land on an objective and there's a stalker lair up and there's a lair of the I'm drawing a blank, the Shriekers, and say there's an illegal broadcast tower all within a close proximity, you need to be able to quickly say, okay, Stalker's Lair is number 1, Shrieker's Lair is number 2, main objective is number 3, illegal broadcast is number 4. I cannot tell you how many missions that I have nearly lost because I'm playing on bots and people are trying to do the main objective while they're being fired on by something that's a higher priority, like artillery, or even worse, all those autocannon skybot things. Those have to be taken out first, or you're just going to sit there and burn lives trying to do the main objective. Maybe I should have included this in the combat section, but remember that most of the enemies are actually pretty unintuitive on their weak points. Like the bots with the giant glowing vents, okay, that's pretty easy, that's obvious. But like chargers, their giant exposed butt is actually not a weak point and you're wasting ammo by firing on that. Most robots, you don't necessarily want to shoot the giant glowing parts, but again, their legs, because as soon as they lose balance, they're going down. Gunships can be taken down if you hit the same engine multiple times, even with weaker guns. So knowing those critical weak points that are actually weak points and not just areas that you think should do more damage but don't actually do is super important. Another good one is don't waste your drop-in. As we talked about, death is a part of the game. It's not necessarily a bad thing, and if you're being called in, especially in the middle of a fight, you don't have to run away from the fight. You can drop in on big enemies and take down those high-value targets with your hell pod. If it's a stalker's nest, you can use that time where you're free-falling to get really close to the stalker's nest and take it out. If it's a detector tower, you can use that to position yourself to be able to call in a hell bomb and take it out. A lot of people's instinct is to drop in as far away from the action as possible so you can call in your gear and try and readjust, when it would actually be more valuable to drop in on the high-value target and take them out, even if you trade a life for a life. One of the final tips I'll touch on when it comes to this is really learn the mission types. Different gear will work differently on different mission types. For example, having a mortar barrage on a eradicate mission is seen as a huge benefit. But bringing that same mortar barrage on a mission where you have to evacuate the scientists, where it's just going to take out your own people, is seen as a huge negative. A lot of people really dislike the 380 barrage, but on some missions like Bust the Bunkers, it's absolutely essential for taking them out from a long distance without actually having to go in there and hellbomb the bunker. The laser cannon is typically seen as an S-tier weapon when you bring it against the robots because it will absolutely melt those heat vents in a matter of seconds. But when you bring it against the bugs, it can't do very much against behemoths, chargers, or bile titans. Using a one-handed weapon on a mission where you have to deliver the SSD across the map is super beneficial, and it gives you an edge up that other people wouldn't have if they brought just their regular primaries. It's also worth noting, if you haven't come back in a while, if you've been away for a few months, because of all the constant balance changes, things that used to be useless or you didn't like have actually become wonderful. Things like the gas strike have gotten super buffed, the flamethrower have gotten some huge buffs and can absolutely melt chargers. The spear was finally fixed so it locks on super wonderfully, and then it was causing the game to crash, but it's fixed now, so the spear, as of me making this video, is viable once more. Now this next one's probably going to be my most controversial tip, so I saved it for towards the end so that if people want to yell at me, well, at least they had to watch 10 minutes of good opinions first. It's time to put down the shield generator backpack. It uses one of your stratagem slots, it takes up your whole backpack, which limits a lot of other options, and it's an absolute crutch. Once you learn how to play without that extra defense, without that extra, oh no, I'm standing in the wrong spot but I can take a hit, not only do you become a better player, but now you've got your backpack freed up and an extra stratagem slot to play with other things or bring more useful things for your team. And honestly, I'm almost tempted to say the same thing for the 500 kg. And while I won't call it a crutch, and I do know that it is useful, I think a lot of people don't know how to use the 500 kg. If you haven't noticed, it does not do a lot of damage in a large circle. The damage is actually a cone that goes upwards from the point of impact. What this means is tall creatures like Bile Titans and Chargers can take the brunt of the impact and get taken down from it. But small bugs don't even get impacted by it unless it hit them directly. So when you throw it on a bug hole that's popping for the first time, yeah, you might get 5 or 10 kills, but that's a huge waste where you could do that with your primary. And considering how often it misses and how unreliable it is, I dare say it's a better pick to take the precision strike or just the orbital strike in general. And since we're talking about using stratagems properly, let's talk a little bit about some other strategies and strategies with stratagems. Throwing a 380 barrage onto a Bile Titan is an absolutely horrid idea. There's a good chance that it will miss anyways and not hit anything important. I'm going to go ahead and use the unpopular opinion too that I don't think good players utilize the mechs. There's just too much chance of them getting destroyed randomly, the missiles were nerfed into the ground, and the autocannon just isn't worth bringing that mech. With the super long cooldown and the limited use, it just doesn't make sense. Consider the laser cannon, for example, which has a shorter cooldown and one more use. It's so powerful that one orbital laser cannon can take down a whole heavy automaton base by itself. I do not believe you could do that with one mech. The EMS mortar is like a cheat code. You can throw it down practically anywhere and get value out of it. It fires darn near across the map, slows almost every single enemy, and has an almost 0% chance of taking out your allies. So there you have it. A few tips for your stratagems, a few tips for your combat, and a few tips for just how to play in general that should bump you up to that next level. If you have any tips I didn't share here, please put them in the comments. As always, I appreciate you watching this far. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that sort of thing to help me, and have a blessed day.